morning, everybody, and welcome back to another Pro2Pro Live. We are coming to you today from our Cape Ann project, which you can see is very much under construction, and there's a lot of folks running around here, so you may be hearing some work in the background. For the next half hour or so, we're going to be talking about installing and flashing windows. And we're going to be taking your questions at the end of this demonstration. So if you're watching this on our YouTube page or Facebook page, on our .com, you can just throw your questions into the comments section on any one of those platforms, and we will be answering them. And when I say we, I'd like to introduce you to our guest, Christine Williamson. She is a building scientist. You may know her as the handle Building Science Fight Club, very popular on Instagram. Your father and I, Joe Stiebrick, we know each other. We go way back. You're blood. You're a building science lineage.
Building science in the blood, that's right.
Which is very awesome. So you're dropping knowledge on a whole bunch of type of things as a building science. Tell us just a little bit about that. You know, it's forensics, it's building, how they're built, how they're deconstructed.
Yeah, so the best way to understand it is that I take a look at things that have already gone wrong and figure out what happened and what we can do to fix it.
Yep.
And then on the front end, I help people avoid those same kinds of mistakes at the outset.
Perfect.
What not to do.
Well, so today, those things that on the front end we're going to be talking about are these window installations.
Exactly.
And so we've got a couple mock-ups right here. We're going to be talking about the openings and then eventually the windows, and it's going to be installing and flashing. All right?
Exactly.
So what are we protecting against?
So water is our primary enemy. Most non-structural failures in our buildings, non-structural, non-fire failures have to do with water.
Right.
So water is our big enemy in this. And when we talk about a wall, just the regular wall, our wall does a lot of things, and we use different materials to do those things. So this is a sheathing material, and it's got a structural function.
We've got a little bit of, so we've got 2x6 construction.
So this is our structure.
Sheathing on the outside.
Sheathing, also structure, but this is what we call an integral sheathing plus water and air control membrane. So it's got a coating on the face of the sheathing, and this is the material inside our walls that guards against, controls water, and it also controls air in the same material.
And you think about these things in those layers, that there's a water control layer, there's an air control layer. This one, as you say, is integral. It's not the only way to get those layers up on a sidewall.
Exactly. There are lots of different types of materials and products we use for this. Historically, we used felt papers, asphalt impregnated papers, plastic building wraps like Tyvek or Typar or Weathermate Plus. Those all work as well. For the purposes of our discussion today, the fact that this is integral kind of helps conceptually describe a window installation a little bit better, but there's all kinds of stuff that you can use, yes.
Gotcha. In this case, it's the zip sheathing. So we've got our two layers combined into one, and now we got to talk about, once we've got this thing all set up, we actually go and cut a hole in the wall,
and we
our
want to
window
see
opening.
Through it.
Right.
I mean, the conceit here. You want windows? What?
Right. But these layers, you talk about this a lot, you want to bring these layers and you want to bring them inside this opening. So if there's water and air control here, as soon as you move inside this wall, you can see that it stops here on the edge of the sheathing and it stops here on the 2x6.
Yes, so this is the most typical install that we see. So the first thing we want to do, or we want to do two things. We want to protect our framing, the materials that we use in our buildings themselves, just the materials. We want to protect them from water damage. And then the second thing we want to do is connect these control layers to our window, to the thing that we see through. So the window has to perform all the same functions as the rest of the wall, but it has to do it in a way that we can see through.
And look beautiful in the process.
And look beautiful. So it's doing, our window is, it's a workhorse, not a show pony.
I love that. That's very good. So connecting those layers, that's where we talk about flashing, where we're now going to connect this outside to the inside. We've got one flashing detail right here. Walk us through it.
So this is the most common way of doing this because we prioritize drainage and protecting the rough opening. So what we've done is we've put a little piece of siding here.
So this is a clapboard. And it literally sits on an otherwise flat sill right here.
And it gives us a slope to the exterior. And we do that because we are anticipating not being perfect later on. No material is perfect and no installation is perfect. And even if they're perfect today, they're not going to be perfect over the life of the building. So if we want this window to be in good shape 50 years or 100 years from now, we need to plan ahead for failure. And the way that we do that is one of the ways is we provide a slope to the exterior in this clapboard.
Yep.
And then we want to protect it with a membrane,
Which we've got right here.
that will protect it from water. And so we direct any water that lands on it to the exterior.
Yep. So let's talk about the membrane. In this case, it is a self-adhering flashing. It is the zip material.
Yep.
And so there's a couple of different ways we can do this. One of them is the traditional tape, what looks a lot like this. This happens to be zip again, but there are other brands, that work just as well.
Works great. I love the approach. It's what we call a membrane sill flashing as opposed to, say, a metal one. And the membranes are terrific. The thing to pay attention to is how well these membranes conform to the geometries of the rough opening, especially at the corners.
Right.
And this is where stuff that's stretchable, like this stretch tape, really shows its advantages, performance.
So if this is a non-stretch right here, this comes off of a roll, and this is the stretch, and we'll just demonstrate.
Magic, this stuff.
You love it, don't you?
Oh, I do. Look at this.
I'm going to take the backer off just one half here so that we can show the stretchiness of it. Bringing it back here. And show us what you love about it.
I love this about it, but not so much doing this with your hands, because this is obviously an unrealistic situation. You're not going to be pulling on your flashing.
Right, I've got another one here for you.
But it's real common to get some bridging of your membrane at the corner. This one's a mock-up done in perfect conditions, and so it conforms really well.
But
what if it didn't?
Talking about could look like, I'm going to exaggerate it just so we can
Yes.
see it. It could look like that.
Exactly. Now this becomes a problem when you go to install the window, because the window is rigid and it can poke a hole exactly where we don't want it, right in the corner here.
Right.
But with a material that's as stretchy as this, look at that.
Push that in.
You'd be hard pressed to poke a hole through that membrane
I
through
have
an
just
ordinary install.
Bridged that gap because it's stretched. You like?
That's beautiful.
You like that right there. Okay, so we've got the tape on, stretch or non-stretch, this membrane, and here it is across the base and it is up the side, but only a few inches.
So this is a good baseline installation. This will serve you very well in many settings, but many homeowners want additional performance out of their window. They want better performance in terms of air control, and they want a more durable window installation. So this addresses the highest risk area, which is the sill, but there's absolutely a next step that you can take to get better performance.
Okay, but at this level, this could be sufficient. We could install our window right over this and we're good to go.
I would be so pleased if most homes in America, in fact, did this. This is a beautiful install. It works really well.
All right, well, we have higher expectations for today, and there's a lot
Indeed.
more to learn. So we've got the second mock-up, and just to kind of compare and contrast, again, we're using the zip sheething, so this is integral water and air layer together.
Exactly.
We have got I'm just going to twist this way. We have got the clapboard installed, which gives us our pitch to the outside, simply nailed to the opening there. And then things get different. We have abandoned the tape as our flashing, and we've gone with the fluid.
Exactly. The fluid is essentially a gun-grade sealant. It comes out of a tube of caulk here.
I'm going to actually ask you to put some right there, just so that we
right.
can demonstrate it.
So you just
Perfect. You can just set that at your feet.
Sure.
Anywhere, and then just as an example, you can then take that and tool it, trowel it onto your surface,
Exactly.
which is exactly what we did down here.
Now, what's nice about this is that you can really well conform to both substrate changes. So you've got a lot going on at rough openings, right? You've got the clapboard, you've got the sheathing, you've got your framing, and using the fluid like that makes it a lot easier to bridge different substrates and really get into the corners.
Yeah. So all things being equal, cost aside, it's your own house. Stretch tape or fluid for you?
Fluid.
Fluid.
Absolutely, I love this stuff. But that said, different people have different preferences, and whatever you're most comfortable getting a good, solid install is what you should use.
Okay, so in this case, no tape fluid, and also the other difference is that we now have it applied to the base, but all the way in. And you've got it all the way up the sides and all the way across the head, and it would be back down the other side as well. And it goes all the way back.
Yes. Now what this allows us to do is, remember we've got our water and our air control layer at the face of our sheathing here, and this lets us bring those control layers to the interior so that we can, and this facilitates us tying in the control layers of the window with the control layers of the wall.
Gotcha. All right, so now let's connect those layers. Once the fluid applied is on the entire opening, done appropriately, we now have a fairly traditional window. This is one of the higher end ones from Marvin, which we cut in half. Chris did that for us. It is a flanged window, so it sets in and the flange gets nailed to the opening on top of the fluid.
So structure dictates a lot of this stuff, and how we actually fasten the window to the rough opening matters a great deal to us. So windows come in two kind of categories, flanged and unflanged. And this is the flanged variety, which is very, very common in residential construction. And among flanged windows, there are two types. Those with flanges that are integral to the frame, they come out of the same extrusion, so there's no joint between the flange and the frame itself. It's all one piece, or this kind, which is the snap-in variety of flange.
I'm just going to turn this sideways, and you're going to show us that this is a snap-in. So the flange is a different material than the window.
Exactly, and it snaps in, and then we fasten the window through these holes through the flange.
Gotcha.
But what this means is that we've got this joint. And this joint, we're going to need to account for that when we go to protect our window to wall interface from water. We really want to make sure that we end up sealing that joint.
All right, so let's talk about that, because now that we've got the window in, it is properly nailed per the manufacturer's specifications, every hole. They also give us these little tabs to bridge a corner. For this particular window, we've done that, and we have set it into a bead of caulk because the manufacturer wants that as well.
Yes, most manufacturers, probably all of them, I can't think of a single manufacturer that does not have that requirement. They want you to be what we call back bedding the flanges in sealant. So it's just a matter of pookying on sealant at the head and the jambs.
Pookying on?
That's technical term.
Building scientists here,
exactly. And then when you set it in the rough opening, you can see it kind of smoosh out the sides. But the most important thing to remember with this is, while you want to do this per the manufacturer's instructions at the head and the jambs, you do not want to do this at the sill. So you want to leave this sill unsealed. I'm
going to turn this just this way so we can see it and talk to it. So down here, where we have got let me put it a little bit towards you, where we have got the flange right there, there is no caulk right there.
No caulk.
And to your point, we're going to make this thing watertight, but we're going to account for a failure.
Exactly.
If there is one, you might get water in up here, but we know wherever it comes in, it's going to migrate probably down to the sill.
Exactly.
And you want it to come out.
Exactly. Drainage, drainage, drainage. We want to make sure that any kind of incidental water that comes in through our window now or for the life of the building, or through a defect in the stuff that we do, our installation, we want to make sure that that water has an outlet. And the best place to put that outlet is right there at that sill flange.
Yep. So
let that water out.
No pooky caulk down there.
No, none.
All right. So we're going to twist this way. Now that it's in and we put the caulk into 3 places, not the 4th, we are going to seal this, and I'm going to grab the tape for that. We're actually going to do this right now, so it's not going to be a perfect job, but if you will, we'll just do a little bit of this side and a little bit of this head, if that works for you. So
absolutely.
Hold the bottom right there, and I'll cut you a piece, because you have got an installation tip for us with the tape. Okay, ready?
So you're going to want to stick it in.
Let me turn a little more.
But you're going to want to make sure that you cover that joint between the snap-in flange and the frame itself.
So I'm going to want to make sure that the tape actually hits this metal part of the window.
Exactly. Now, that's less of a deal. You don't need to do that if the flange is the integral kind.
Right.
But because this is a snap-in kind, we want to cover that joint.
Am I up high enough for your benefit right now?
You sure are.
All right, so I'm going to push that in right there. We have covered the flange. I'm going to bring it here to the side wall. I've gone up above the head. And we would have normally have come all the way down and it finished a few inches below the sill right here. For demonstration purposes, that's good enough.
Exactly.
And that's your point.
Yes, yeah, you gotta seal that, you gotta seal that. Now, if you miss it, if you're not perfect, you can take some of that gun grade or some sealant and smoosh it over that line on the outside, but you wanna see it.
Let's just finish that off, if you will. Hold this while I cut another piece.
Of course.
Right there. That's actually probably too much, so let me, oof. Ah, I shouldn't have done it. Here, watch, ready? Let me do this right there. Let's just do the small piece. You're gonna want an overlap, side one going up, you're gonna want an overlap going this way, and you're gonna wanna make sure I cover that flange on the top as well.
Exactly.
And right there.
Now, two things are gonna be different when you do this on a non-mock-up condition. One is you probably wanna hold this down a little bit so that the head tape is shingle lapped over top of it.
Yep.
And then the second thing is, like it says on the tape itself, any tape you're using, no matter what the manufacturer, no matter what the system, you want to roll it out so that it stays adhered to the substrate.
Gotcha. And we will have done this detail. This is just a mock. We would have done it here, and then across the top.
Exactly. Never at the flange at the sill. You leave it. It's very hard for some people because intuitively it's, I want to waterproof everything, but drainage is much, much, much more important.
Right.
And we want to make this install as forgiving as possible,
right,
accounting for imperfection in both the window itself and in our installation. None of us is perfect, and no material is ever perfectly installed.
So we obviously don't want the caulk. We don't want the tape. I get both of those. It's going to allow the water to come out. It's going to let the air in.
Exactly.
And this is a totally new concept to me, this idea of letting the air in.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
So remember we talked about our wall doing two things here. The exterior face of our sheathing is our water control layer, but it's also our air control layer. And we've got one material that performs both functions. Now, when we come into the window, we're actually going to separate those functions out.
Separate the water control from the air control.
Exactly. So at the flange of the window, at that plane in our wall.
Right here.
Exactly. That's where our water control is going to be. So our primary water control is right around here.
Yep.
Now, we're going to bring our air control to here.
Bring it to the back of the inside of this opening.
Exactly. And we're going to provide a full perimeter seal, backer rod and sealant joint, just like we've got here.
We're going to flip this around, and we're going to show this detail. And I'm just going to let people know, if I can find a piece of the backer rod, which is right behind you. Would you grab that for me, please, Christine? So what we have done here, prior to the going on camera, was the backer rod was installed back in that gap all the way around, and then we came over it with a caulk. Exactly. And covered that as well.
Yep. Now the most important thing here is to remember that this needs to be a full perimeter seal.
So in this case, along the bottom side.
Jam and sill. Exactly. Because if you've got a gap in an air seal, it's not an air seal.
No,
the air just goes around it.
Right, but you brought it inside the wall. This is that separation between the water and the air now. You brought the air in.
Exactly.
I just want to call out that detail right there, because that is where that backer rod is, with the bead of caulk right in front of it.
So the reason the backer rod is so important is, one, because we don't want to use so much caulk. We don't want to fill that whole space up with material that we don't need. And then the second is we want to keep a gap between our water seal and our air seal.
An air gap.
We want to keep that gap, or we call it a chamber to sound very fancy.
Sure, yeah.
So we want a chamber in between the two seals, our water seal and our air seal, and we want air to fill up that chamber, believe it or not.
Now, before you tell me why, I just want to make it clear, because this is a typical application. Once it has been sealed on the outside, people will come by with a gun of foam and they will stick it in, not only sealing it, but pushing the foam all the way in.
Exactly.
And you're thinking, oh good, I get good R value for that. I get rid of all the air. And you're saying, not such a good idea.
So people like to use foam a lot, I get that, and you can still use foam to achieve this interior seal if you want. But if you're going to use foam, you should also use a backer rod with it, because we don't want to fill this whole cavity up. We want to preserve the rough opening's ability to drain.
So this air gap is critical in your estimation. You want this to be there.
Absolutely critical. We need to preserve the entire installation's capacity to drain.
So if water were to get behind here, it would stop there potentially, but it has this ability, this opening right here, to work its way down and work its way out.
Exactly.
A
You don't want it sitting there sponging up the foam
right.
and staying wet.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the air gap does another thing for us, and this is the thing that blew my mind as we're talking about it.
It's so genius. It's fantastic, this air gap. So, one thing that people have trouble with providing a space for drainage is they say, well, if I let water out, doesn't that also let water in? It can, but it's not going to. The reason it's not going to is because it lets a little bit of air in. And the reason that's important is because we can use these two seals together for what we call, to create what we call a pressure moderated seal. So we create a chamber in between these two seals, and we want the pressure inside that chamber to be roughly the same as the pressure outside.
So the pressure outside during a storm is going to increase because the wind is blowing. So just basically thinking higher pressure here, outside lower pressure here.
Exactly.
You'd like those to be as similar as possible?
The best way to show it is if you pick up that piece of plastic there and hold it tight.
So this piece of plastic right here,
So this is going to represent our seal.
which is, so with this tape in the front, it's as if there's a seal right here in front of the window opening.
Exactly. So now if my finger represents the wind or wind-driven rain and I push against it,
You're now the outside.
I'm creating a pressure, and this needs to do a whole lot of work to resist the force on the outside. But if I do this, and I match the pressure on both sides of this, what happens to this?
It's not really doing anything.
Doesn't have to do nearly as much work to keep the wind and water out.
So when I leave this open to the air and I allow pressure to get in there, winds howling 30 miles an hour out here, high pressure, that high pressure will enter, I'm going to go back up here, that high pressure will enter this chamber,
fills it up,
stop here.
And now it's already full.
So you have somewhat of an equalization, or you guys don't call it equalization.
Call it pressure moderation.
So similar pressure here and here on the outside, making, well, this would be tape, but making this little barrier here not stretched, not stressed.
Not stressed, exactly. So what happens is that this seal on the outside, our water seal, it sees water, but it doesn't see pressure. And this seal here, it sees pressure, but it doesn't see water.
Wow, that's just crazy.
And what's great about that is this seal gets a whole bunch of abuse, right? It's outside. This seal gets to stay pristine forever. We never see UV, sun, you don't get birds pecking at it. It gets to be perfect forever.
Right. Oh, interesting. That's a whole new concept. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at this being like, what the heck did she just say?
Well, we do this sometimes we do things and we forget why we do them.
Right.
And this is in fact the same technology that we use to keep water out of buildings. Some of the tallest buildings in the world use exactly this technique.
Commercial buildings?
So skyscraper will use, within the window system itself, will use exactly this technique of pressure moderation to reduce the strain on those seals. And you've got to imagine that strains on a glazing system that's 50 stories in the air sees a lot of pressure from wind and rain.
I mean, those buildings actually sway. So if there's enough wind pressure to move the building, you can only imagine what it would be doing on that seal. So that is a defensive mechanism that they use in the commercial space.
Exactly. So we use it on, but it's the same technology, the same kitchen table physics is available on a single-story bungalow as is used on the tallest buildings in the world.
Very cool. Okay, I want to introduce one last thing, and it is this detail right here. And so this, in this case, it's copper flashing. It doesn't have to be copper, but it would be a flashing detail that we often will install above the window. If I got that right about there. Talk to me about this.
So this is what we call a secondary head flashing. And the term secondary matters a great deal. We install it after our window is already dried in. So prior to installing that, we're waterproof, we're good. We are all set. Now we install this at the top and we'll tape it to the top of our water and air control layer, or make sure it's shingle lapped, depending on whatever you're using. You want to make sure things are shingle lapped properly.
And then on top of that, we will bring our finished detail, clapboards or shingles over this down to about the top here.
Exactly. Now the purpose of this secondary head flashing is to divert water. It's like an umbrella. So it reduces the load. We call it, just like we have structural loads, we treat water as a load. It reduces the load on the window. So again, if you're not perfect somewhere, this reduces how much how much water the window ever sees.
Gotcha. Okay. Unbelievable. All right. So just as a little bit of a recap before we go to questions, this is an appropriate application. You're happy with this?
Absolutely.
But this is
gold standard.
Gold standard right here. And we are prioritizing water first, air second, and then that thermal, R value back and forth third.
That's actually a good thing to bring up before we go to questions. A lot of people really like doing this interior seal with a sprayed foam and filling that whole cavity for the thermal benefits. But you described this in exactly the right order. Our priorities are water control first, air control second, thermal control third.
Right.
So we never want to do something for a thermal benefit at the expense of drainage and drying, for example.
So that's our order of importance.
Exactly.
Water, air, thermal. The other lesson is that we want to bring those control layers into the opening.
You got it.
We want to make sure that those control layers are connected to the window. Obviously, this is a critical feature. Do not caulk or flash the bottom.
Don't seal it, never ever.
Expect drainage.
Expect drainage.
And then to me, the new big idea is this way that you treat that interior detail, which is you now have your, I'm going to go back up here. You keep, at this particular moment, you keep your water control outside and you bring your air control inside, and it gives you this magic chamber.
Exactly. Now, one final thing to keep in mind, because people do they care a great deal about the thermal performance as well. When you've got this chamber in between the two seals for air, remember that still air, as in not moving air, is an excellent insulator in and of itself.
Yeah, we use it all the time.
Exactly, in between our panes of glass. Right. Now we also use gases there too, like argon, and that works too. But still air is a very good insulator, and so you don't lose the amount of the thermal hit that you take from omitting this very tiny amount of insulation is negligible when you compare that to the performance with the insulating property of still air.
Beautiful. All right. And one other thing that I just noticed that I didn't even ask you about, this is a 2x6 wall. This is a window that is probably closer to for a 2x4 wall. At some point, an extension jam is going to go on this.
Yes.
This layer that you're talking about here with our backer rod and our caulk, is this in the right place given that we're going to have an extension jam? Is this done at the right time? How would you handle that?
Yes. So this is an excellent point to bring up. This is part of, this air seal is not a beauty bead. It's part of how it's really a sealant system. We're using an exterior seal and an interior seal to manage both water and air, and they should be installed around the same time. So this is not the seal that gets installed by your drywall contractor.
Or the painter.
Or the painter, exactly. This is a functional seal, and it's part of the water and air management system of the window. So it should go on before the jam extension or any kind of trim or interior features that you've got going on here.
And in this case, when that extension jam goes on, it is appropriate that it's also now an inch or two in from our finished wall. That's fine.
No problem.
Yeah, because we still have the air gap and we have a seal.
At this point, we're dried in already. Whatever we do on the inside is outside the realm of building science.
Beautiful. All right, so you up for some questions?
Absolutely.
All right, let me see. We've got an iPad right here. Okay, so if you've been watching and you've got questions for Christine, come on in right here. This is your opportunity to ask them. You can, we are live, so you can put them into the comment section of whatever platform you are watching this on, whether it be our .com, our Facebook, YouTube, I'm not sure where else we're going. And I'm going to jump right into it. The first question comes from Joseph from YouTube. Thank you for joining us, Joseph. And he says, do I install doors the same way?
Absolutely. It is a good question. And all of the same principles that apply with windows also apply with doors. So excellent question. That is true. All the same principles apply with one caveat. So not only windows, you got to see through them. Doors, we want to walk through them.
Yeah, right.
Crazy. What are these architects going to come up with next? And so because we have this, we want to be able to walk through our doors, we got to be careful at the sill.
Right.
From impact.
This area down here would now be, this would be the ground.
We're going to step on this stuff.
Step on this.
So we want to make sure that we protect our control layers from the physical impact damage that that we're going to get. And actually behind you, I can see a piece of sill flashing.
Yeah,
so
yep.
you would set something like this in at a door.
So this would end up going on top of your soft flashing?
Exactly, on top of your, so we call this a membrane sill flashing, and this is a metal pan flashing, and it would go on top, and its role in this is not really water management. Its role is to physically protect the membrane underneath it. So if you do that, you don't need to tie it into the jam flashing, or you just set it.
Set it.
Set it in there and leave it.
Don't set it in a bead of caulk.
If you caulk it, which you might want to do to keep it in place, only do so at the very back, because we want to be able to drain underneath it.
Gotcha.
Now, if you have to set through it, if you've got to, because you're going to have to nail or fasten the threshold mechanically into the structure.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do then is to pre-drill your fasteners and fill it with pookie, and then put the fastener in again.
Beautiful. Okay. All right, come on back over here. That was from Joseph on YouTube. Thank you for that. Amy from Facebook says, what if I live on the coast? If I let water out, isn't that a place to let water in? So what she's getting at here is, okay, that's great, but I got 50-mile-an-hour winds, sideways rain. That's a weak spot.
Exactly.
What say you?
I say that it is even more important.
Whoa.
If you are on the coast, it's even more important to provide drainage in your openings. Now, yes, it is true that a pathway out is also a pathway in, but remember that this is also, we don't see the sill flange of our windows
It's gonna be
and
covered
doors.
with finished tree.
So we get some moderating effect by the cladding itself. So you're not directly abusing this one area. So it's if there were ever a safe place to provide drainage, this is it. It's both.
Gotcha.
And it's what we call a concealed weep. So it's a concealed weep. So drainage is even more important on the coast where the wind and rain load is higher. And then that is especially where we get to see this pressure moderation shine, is in coastal areas where we get a lot of wind-driven rain. You want the full perimeter interior seal and the drainage and pressure moderated effect of leaving an opening at the sill. So it's even more important.
Because point being, if a window's going to leak, it's more likely to do it there, which is why drainage becomes even more critical.
Exactly. Now, what this really means, though, is do not skip this interior seal. A lot of people, we think, oh, we're on the inside here. All the action is on the outside. I've got to do a good job here, but once I'm here, it's not that important. Nuh-uh. This is the interior seal. Doesn't get a lot of love, but it should. It's doing a lot of work.
The other thing that I take away from that, which I appreciate, is the terminology concealed weep, which is what I'm going to tell my wife when she asks me why I don't show more emotion. I'm going to tell her it's a concealed weep.
Concealed weep.
Absolutely. All right. Moving right on. Dale from Facebook says, if I caulk the if I caulk the rough opening before I install the sheathing, do I still need to tape?
So I think that
before the sheathing.
I think that what Dale is getting at is with this installation.
If you wanted, he's talking about a bead of caulk on the framing here and putting the sheathing embedded into it?
Yes, exactly. So he's correctly identified that, or what he hasn't really said is, what if I want to enhance the performance of this, but I don't want to spend all the money on buying, on wrapping my rough opening on all the way, because this can add up. So how can I improve the performance of this without going? Is there a step in between this and this? And that's exactly a great step. If you seal this interface, you're essentially making your air control layer, your face of the sheathing, to the sealant joint that you won't really be able to see, to the framing itself.
Gotcha.
And that's a great idea, Dale. Lots of people do that and they get excellent results out of it.
With the caulk going between here and here, I'm just going to do this again so the campers can see it. With the caulk going between here and here, the air control layer now comes all the way through here.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Okay, Dale, thank you for that. Alex on YouTube would like to know if there's no insulation in the rough opening cavity, isn't that a place for big energy loss? Where is the R value benefit?
So we talked about this a little bit before, but that's a really common. This is very hard for people because intuitively we think more is better.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that really, but we need to really keep in mind our priorities here. And the added thermal performance that we get out of this very small amount of insulation,
Filling right here.
exactly, is negligible when we consider the effect of stagnant air. This is not a lot of insulation. You're not going to be able to do a great job with it anyway. It's so small that we can't actually measure the difference in performance. You'd have to use tracer gas. It would be very, very difficult to actually study this. Even if you were we can model it with a computer, but we don't even know what to tell the computer to do. We're talking about very, very small differences in thermal performance here. And we don't want to risk, for such a tiny incremental benefit, we don't want to risk inhibiting drainage.
So keep our priorities straight.
Exactly.
Water first, air second,
second,
and then thermal, that heat transfer last.
Exactly. And keep in mind too, so not only is this stagnant air that's a pretty good insulator in and of itself, but particularly residentially, we're using non-conductive materials here. So we've got wood, which is a pretty good insulator in and of itself, and wood framing. This is not a big discontinuity that we're really dealing with. I could give you a dozen more important things to worry about when you're trying to improve thermal performance. Air sealing the rest of your home, for example.
Yeah.
Add more attic insulation.
Right.
This is not
the low-hanging fruit.
This is not the low-hanging fruit.
Gotcha. Okay. Stephen from Facebook would like to know, is the fluid flashing just silicone? Do you actually know what this stuff is?
I don't know the composition of it. They make different kinds, pretty much I'm thinking of all of the ones on the market now are awesome.
Yeah.
There isn't a single fluid applied flashing that is commercially available today that I would identify any kind of problem with. So feel free, pick a sales rep you like, pick a price point you like, but if you're interested in the fluid applied, go to town.
Go to town. Okay. Silicone or not, doesn't matter. Let's see. Dan from Facebook says, great info. Thank you. Indeed.
Thank you, Dan.
In this case, he's concerned about replacement windows that fit in an existing rough opening, no flange. Same install?
So this one is real tricky because what's on the ground, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So it's really hard to give somebody advice without knowing the particulars of their situation. But what I can tell to Dan? Dan, who said thank you, Dan. What I can say is that the principles are all exactly the same. So if you're going to work with an existing rough opening, you're still going to want an interior air seal, yes, and it's even more important to provide an exterior, a discontinuous exterior seal to allow drainage.
Gotcha.
Because you don't know what you're working with.
Yep, fair enough. I understood. We'll just do a couple more very quickly because we're kind of out of time. How long does it take for the fluid flashing to dry before you're able to install the window? That comes to us from Candace on Facebook. The setup time for this stuff right here?
Oh, it's you can do this in the same day.
You can do this in the same day.
Yeah, it's not.
Can you install even when it's still tacky?
It's best to especially at the sill to let it cure out because again we don't want the flange to adhere to the membrane sill flashing because we want it to preserve the ability to drain, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to get a full 21-day cure time. You could do this in the same day.
Gotcha. Another question from Colleen on Facebook says, is the fluid flashing a lot more expensive than the tape? What do you think about that?
Depends on where you are, depends on what you're buying. I think it tends to be more expensive. You have to price it out in whatever market you're in. The one thing to pay attention to where people can go wrong with fluid applied flashing though is a little pro tip.
Please.
That's funny.
That's what we're here for.
Pro tips, that's great.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here.
That's why we bought you coffee this morning.
So when you're bidding and estimating a job, it's really easy to know what the tape is going to cost you. You just measure out the linear feet of tape you need, and that's how much tape you buy. Really easy. with the fluid applied flashing, because they're a little bit new, people are less familiar with how much do I need to buy. You got to work really closely with your sales reps, because I've worked on some jobs before where they underestimate how much fluid is actually needed to get full coverage on your rough openings, and they end up underbidding the job. Now that matters if you're a subcontractor that's actually buying this stuff and you have to go install it, but it also matters if you're an architect or an owner. You're going to want to talk to, and you're interested in this, talk to your installers and make sure that they're bidding it properly. Because if you are hiring a sub and that sub is losing money, that's not a good scene for you.
Right. Nope. Well, it's good. It's a very good point, a good pro tip. Here's a question from Mike on YouTube. I'm going to flip this around so that we can address it. He says, in this case, we, on the exterior layer, we used tape to go over the flange. Could we use fluid underneath the flange and fluid on top of the flange?
Absolutely.
You could treat it that way.
Yep, you can do.
problem.
There's a lot of the most important thing here is the concept, right? The concept of wrapping the rough opening, bringing the control layers into the rough opening, and then providing two seals. One is for water and it's discontinuous at the sill, and the other is for air and it's full perimeter and continuous. How you achieve that? Tons of ways of doing it.
Gotcha. Okay. Ronald from Facebook, and I'm going to make this the last question to respect your time and to stick to our schedule here as much as we can. Ronald from Facebook says, I live in Florida, and I saw a local builder using zip sheathing on one house, and then he switched to Tyvek or some similar material on other houses. Why would someone switch the barrier materials? In other words, why would the same builder use, say, an integral water air control layer on one house and then use a mechanically fastened one on another house?
I mean, it's hard to say without asking the builder. Sometimes you're surprised by these things.
Yep.
Sometimes it's, well, this is what I had left. But it depends on what the performance requirements are. If you have higher performance requirements and are looking for more air tightness in a house, I would recommend using something integral like zip or a fully adhered membrane on your sheathing to be your water control layer and your air control layer.
Right.
If you're more budget conscious, I would recommend using a mechanically attached water and air control layer. Installing a window using a mechanically attached membrane is a little trickier. You have to make sure that you seal the window exact to the sheathing itself, not to the mechanically attached membrane, because we mechanically attach them. A little bit of water gets behind them, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. I wouldn't presume to know why one builder would pick one or the other.
But to your point, in much the idea that this flashing can be appropriate.
Exactly.
And okay, whereas this is the higher standard, both can be used.
Oh, absolutely. Both can be used and are used very successfully to achieve very durable, comfortable interior environments.
Gotcha.
But it depends on what your budget is, what you're comfortable with using, what's available in your area, and what your expectations are. If you're on a tighter budget, absolutely pick a mechanically attached membrane. If
just do it right.
Exactly. I mean, you can still do it right, but if you're on more of a budget, that's what you're going to want to do. For a lot of people, an integral sheathing plus water and air control layer like zip. The commercial version is made by Georgia Pacific. It's Den's Element. So we do the same thing with gypsum-based sheathings. And that represents, for a lot of people, kind of a sweet spot between cost and performance, right? You get a lot of the performance of a fluid applied membrane or a fully adhered membrane over everything without the labor or the cost. It's an integral product, so it's a good sweet spot, but
Gotcha.
Depends on a lot of things.
I get it. Christine, thank you for the master class, all that great information in your head. We appreciate you sharing it with us today for all the pros out there who are watching and anyone else who may be watching. You'll come back and join us again, I hope?
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you,
Terrific.
Kevin.
All right. Well, we're going to end it there. We appreciate you guys tuning in for this live Pro2Pro. We'd like to thank our friends at Marvin for sponsoring the Pro2Pro and sharing this information with all of you. We hope it was helpful. We appreciate the interaction with the questions and know that we will do more of these in the future, so check them out. Christine, again, thank you very much, and thank you all for tuning in. We're signing off. Nice job.